Welcome, everybody, to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno, episode 34. Today's guest is SportsCentre reporter Matthew Scianitti. Matthew, thank you so much for being on today's episode. I'm super excited. We got lots of things to talk sports, and we also got a lot of important topics to discuss later on as well. But I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with you today.
Happy holidays. I really appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to it.
So first things first, we got to get out of the way as yes, that this is not trolling in the background. The Jacksonville Jaguars are my favorite team, and you are a fan of the New York Jets. And so what has been the feeling for yourself around the end of the season, the prospect for Trevor Lawrence initially, and how gut-wrenching it kind of is to get all this way to win 2 games and blow the best opportunity to get an amazing generational quarterback?
Well, either way, I think had the Jets actually gotten Lawrence and gone 0-16, which would have been the first team to ever win a Super Bowl and then do the complete nosedive all the way down to going through a winless season, the Jets would have found a way to screw it up. I mean, I've been a Jets fan now for over 2 decades, and it's had a bunch of ups and downs, and it's a lot more downs than ups. But I would encourage anyone. I had to, through our NFL producer at TSN, Dennis Barham, I wrote an essay on why the Jets are the worst franchise in football. And it got resounding praise from a lot of people because it hit all the right notes that the Jets can't draft well. The Jets can't coach, never get a good coach. And when they do, Bill Belichick, he fires himself 24 hours later. And they have a absolute parade of who's that players throughout their history. So it's, at this point in my life, it's become a delightful punchline. I've seen some great games. I mean, I for any Jets fan, the highlight of the highlight for them, at least over the last 20 years, would be beating Tom Brady in the divisional round in 2010 in Foxborough, which I wasn't there, but I still vividly remember watching. But you're still young. I would tell you, Matias, that if you feel at any moment like it's not worth it, don't waste your sporting life cheering for a bad team, man. You can sometimes, and I know people who are Lions fans and I know people who are Browns fans, and it feels like this point of pride that one day you'll climb up the mountain and everything will feel great. Life doesn't always work like that. Good teams are good and great teams are great for a reason. There's a reason why the Steelers have won a ton of NFC North titles. It's a reason why the Patriots were so great for 25 years. Or 20 years, I should say. There are structures built in place to endure. And when you're a bad team, it also works on the negative end too. You're bad for a reason. So I wish you all the best with Trevor Lawrence. You probably do a heck of a lot better with him than we would have. But if it doesn't go well, don't be ashamed if you start to reconsider your allegiances.
Well, I know for a fact that there have been many low moments as a Jaguars fan within the last decade, considering the fact that the Jags had the second worst record in the 2010s next to the Cleveland Browns, who did have the 0-17 or 0-16 season in 2017 that aided them in capturing that terrible feat. But I would honestly make the argument that the truly worst franchise in NFL history would be the Detroit Lions. And I know the Browns have gone 0-16 and they're really bad, and they almost did back-to-back 0-16s, if not for Josh Lambeau's short wide right field goal in Cleveland in Week 15 in 2015 or 16, I think, or 2016, I think it was. But the Lions, not only the fact that they have won one playoff game in who knows how long, they've never made the NFC Championship, and I think they've only won one playoff game in the Super Bowl era at all. So,
well, I would say this about I would agree with that statement in terms of also wasting the incredible careers of both Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson. I mean, 2 generational. You think about if Calvin Johnson played on any other team, he would have been at least he would have gone to 1 Super Bowl. Barry Sanders, the closest to Jim Brown since Jim Brown played. But the one thing about the Lions that's actually different than the Jets. The Jets have 1 season of greatness. The Lions actually won in the 50s 2 or 3 NFL titles. And until about the 70s, were not a horrible team. Like, they had seasons when they were bad. But there is, as I said in my essay, there is history there. There is a bit of tradition, being a Lions fan. Even as a Browns fan, too, like you think about the 80s, although people always talk about the drive and the fumble in their AFC Championship losses to John Elway and the Denver Broncos. The fact is, the Cleveland Browns they set the standard in the NFL for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was the Browns in the old NFL East. I might be getting that wrong. And then it was also the Green Bay Packers on the other side. So when I was talking about it, I was talking about it like whole cloth and saying that in terms of the Jets, if you really think about it, they only had 1967. And then they had kind of like blips where they went to one AFC championship game, and they've won playoff games, but it was always inconsequential. And at least the Lions and having Megatron and having Barry Sanders, they had transcendent football talent. If you go through the Jets history, apart from maybe Mark Gastineau and the sack exchange in the 80s, the Jets had just like talent. Like they had Curtis Martin, but as much as I love Curtis Martin was just a work pail, bring your hard hat, just going to go ahead and I'll get you 100 yards. And he wasn't a flashy, incredible running back. He's a Hall of Famer, no doubt, because he was consistent, but he wasn't like a generational, incredible talent like an Emmitt Smith was. And the Jets passed on drafting Emmitt Smith. They passed on drafting Warren Sapp. They passed on drafting Dan Marino. So in terms of whole cloth incompetency and utter horribleness, I mean, if you take the entire history of the franchise, the Jets are just the worst.
Yeah, the Jets, like when you put it that way, I know that even though the Lions took, Andre Ware, and they also took, what's his name? Who's the quarterback that they took that it's slipping my mind now, because they took Andre.
Are you talking about the bad quarterbacks or?
Yes, the bad.
Joey Galloway or not Joey Galloway? There's one.
Was it Joey Harrington?
Joey Harrington.
Yeah, Joey Harrington and Andre Ware, and there was a few other players that they took since the 2000s that have just been absolutely brutal. But yeah, if you consider before the Super Bowl era, then sure, the Lions did have. Was it? I could be wrong. Was his name Matthew Lane, or why am I thinking of what's his name? Oh my goodness, he was the quarterback. He won 3 or 4 NFL titles in a row, and then when he got traded, he said to the Lions, I cursed this team to never win for 50 years. And then the 50th anniversary of that, from 1958 to 2008, the 50th anniversary was 0-16, which is absolutely crazy to think that.
And remember, Matthew Stafford is actually a really good quarterback. People forget that because he's in the same division as Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
And Matthew Stafford, was an Iron Man and has had injuries, but he is not a bad quarterback. And I was watching their game a couple of days ago against the Buccaneers when they were absolutely decimated. And I did agree with the analyst comments that if you're going to bring a coach in and a culture, you can't let go of Matthew Stafford because he can still operate like an elite level quarterback. So, I feel for Lions fans, I feel for Jags fans, I feel for Browns fans, but to be a Jets fan is a singular cross to bear.
Yeah, and I know that if you're a big fan of NFL top 10s and the shows they produce on NFL Network, talking about worst teams and worst seasons, the Jets when they had Rich Kotite, and I think it was the '96 Jets that was like the epitome of the lowest the Jets have gone, and probably even lower than this year. Like, yeah, missing out on Lawrence sucks, but at least they're more talented right now than the Jaguars. Like the Jaguars are actually the worst team in the NFL. And the fact that the Jets can beat the Rams, the fact that they can beat the Browns when they're trying, proves that they do have that slight edge on the Jags, who, albeit no matter how hard they've tried against the Vikings, came close. The Browns, they came close against the Texans. They're still not good enough to finish the job. And if 1-15 is what is meant to be, so be it. I mean, every team's going to have their 1-15 day. And if this is the time the Jags have it, then this is their time.
Adam Gase is always good for one idiot savant game a year. Last year was against the Cowboys, and this year it was against the Rams and maybe the Browns. But I still think he's the absolute worst head coach in professional football.
That I will 100% agree with you on. At least Doug Marrone has taken a team to the AFC Championship. He's done everything he's could. And while he's maybe not the flashiest head coach, he's definitely not the worst. And Gus Bradley was worse. Hugh Jackson, that was not good, even though I think that he's at least funny in the way that his teams struggle. But Adam Gase is definitely, it's not good.
Horrible.
It's not good. But anyhow, so we're talking fun and games about cheering for our teams that suck. But in terms of the opposite of that, teams that are good, you as a SportsCentre reporter have had the amazing, blessed opportunity to have covered so many fantastic events, including the Raptors' historic 2019 NBA championship, as well as having had the opportunity to go down and cover March Madness across the entire US. So to first focus on March Madness, you did a lot of coverage with RJ Barrett, a lot of interviews with him being the Canadian talent for Duke at the time. What was that whole experience like going down to March Madness and really being able to be behind the scenes? And what were some of the first most remarkable moments you experienced in doing work down there?
I have to go back a few weeks before March Madness when I had the pleasure, I had the privilege, and I think he used the word blessed very, very appropriately. Because I feel very lucky to be at the job that I have, that I was able to go watch Zion Williamson and Duke with RJ Barrett go up against University of North Carolina in Cameron Indoor Stadium, which if you've ever been to Duke, it looks very much, it's a very traditional outside, looks like a very traditional college building, stone, high arch ceilings, wood inside, and then you walk in and you realize, and next to the UConn women's basketball program, you think of Duke as the most accomplished, most successful college basketball program, at least of the last 30 years, 35, 40 years. And you walk in there and it's the size of a high school gym, and you're really taken aback by it. And I was there with Michael Grange of Sportsnet, and I walked in. As my reputation precedes me, I love wearing three-piece suits. And I walk in, and Grange, who is just has a button-up on and his tie-off, looks at me and says, "You might want to take that off." The reason being is I had no idea how close, or I hadn't remembered how close the notorious Cameron Crazies are to press row. They are literally on top of you. Like literally, if you have to either walk through them and get blue paint all over you, or you have to step over and try to sit in your seat by going over it, like over the desk. So that was incredible. The sound was incredible. Barack Obama was there that night, and there was a certain energy about the place because of that. And then what was so interesting about that game, and if anyone who watches that footage can see me in the background. I mean, the game became moot within 45 seconds because Zion Williamson blew his knee up. And it kind of showed both sides of the peculiarity that is sports as a mass consumption event, because I walked in there and there was hype and energy, and I had been there most of the day and done stuff for SportsCentre. And then where you're building to this moment, and then it's out of your hands because it's all in the players' hands. And one moment can change everything. And it went from being the most anticipated matchup of those two college basketball rivals into basically a non-event, because once Zion Williamson was out, I mean, it was kind of just like, ugh. And there were, tickets I had heard that day for the upper tiers of Cameron Indoor Stadium, which aren't that far away from the court to begin with, were going for thousands upon thousands of dollars. So it was an interesting moment just seeing sports as a spectacle. But March Madness is one of my favorite sports to cover. I've covered a few of them. And following RJ Barrett, building a relationship with him, taking it all the way to the Elite Eight matchup where they lost to Michigan State, to not just spend time with RJ, but a little bit of time with Zion, Javin DeLaurier as well, other members of that Duke team, to really try to build a relationship with a team that's not Canadian is I think the one thing that TSN does that's different from anyone else, because if you're working for ESPN, you rarely have to come up here and you don't have to spend a lot of time ingratiating yourself into the Canadian sports culture. But when you work for TSN, as I'm sure my colleague Farhan Lalji has told you, as I'm sure Mark Masters will tell you, we have that added, I won't say pressure, but the added objective of having to go down to the United States and really build kind of a reputation and build relationships. And I quite enjoy that about I very much enjoy that about the job. But I think my favorite sport and the thing that I feel most lucky to cover was the 2018 Olympics, when I had the pleasure and the privilege to go over to Pyeongchang in South Korea and cover the Canadian national team, cover the women's hockey team, which now has become certainly a pet hobby of mine to follow that team, some of the players. And the one thing that being in these different environments gives you is twofold. One, it gives you experience, and you're able to touch and see things and experience things. So that's observational experience that then helps you with the second aspect of it, which is content creation. No one can just close their eyes and come up with something that, especially in sports, it's not based on something. I mean, you're obviously very knowledgeable, and a lot of your knowledge is rooted in things in the history of the game that you've taken in and really learned, which is a credit to you. But the next step to that is going to events and experiencing things, interacting with people, interacting with athletes, being there in that moment when Zion Williamson knee blows out and it becomes, this kind of, you're building for a crescendo that just kind of falls flat. Or myself, one of the great experiences that I recount over and over again is interviewing the captain of the Canadian women's national team, Marie-Philippe Poulin, after they had lost in the shootout to the Americans, and having her tell me that she's going to remember that loss every day for the next 4 years, and to feel the intention of her emotions behind what she said, and to know that every day she's thinking about that, which can then go ahead and, potentially build for a feature. So that's why I feel so privileged, I should say, because the experiences, the relationships I have built, the things that I have experienced, not just myself exclusively, but my colleagues, has really, I think, not just helped me, but it's really helped everyone at TSN. I mean, that's I'm not underselling it when I say that, and I'm not bashful when I say that the TSN is great for that reason. That's kind of the expectation that's put on all of us, is to go to a sporting events like March Madness, take in everything, and create content that'll keep bringing people back, that builds sport, as I mentioned earlier, into really this grand spectacle.
It's interesting that you mentioned that point about Duke having the size of a high school gym for their arena, because the first time that I went into the Mattamy Athletic Center in Toronto and saw Ryerson's gym, I've been in gyms across Western Canada in youth sports for the Canada West. Here in Winnipeg, I've been to both, and I've been to the one in Calgary and Alberta and BC. And then when I went to Ryerson, I'm like, why is this so small? This looks like smaller than my high school's B gym. And then it made me realize that maybe, good things come in small packages in terms of how packed it is, how crazy the atmosphere becomes. And Duke is tenfold to what Ryerson fans would experience watching Rams basketball games for men and women. But all the things you mentioned about covering March Madness, really living that moment, that's part of the thing that has been so unfortunate about not being able to go to events as much because of COVID or because of sports being paused. Being there and living in that moment, having to dodge the pain from the crazy fans, or having to listen to the emotion packed behind what Marie-Philippe Poulin had said about such a devastating loss, because we all remember where we were when she scored the overtime winner in 2014 in Sochi, and we were going crazy. I was in chemistry class in the 12th grade, and we were so happy. But seeing that happen on the opposite end, when the U.S. is the winning team, those are the moments that stick with those players. And those are the moments that us as fans kind of observe with a bit of, not remorse, but a bit of a more reserved look on our face, because we think about, what are they feeling? What are they experiencing? How are they using this to fuel them to win? Or what may they experience if they don't complete the job the next time around? And that's definitely one of the other things that goes into watching sports games and being there, because that atmosphere is what it's really all about. That's why people pay thousands upon thousands of dollars to sit in the top of the arena to watch Duke play North Carolina. That's why people pay obscene amounts of money to watch Super Bowls, because the magnitude of the atmosphere at that event is so unlike anything else. And if you watch 30 for 30s, if you watch sports documentaries and the ones that TSN are starting to come out with, that is why we're so captivated as fans. And it's great that you bring up all those points, because that leads into the next question I was going to ask when we discuss the topic of mental health, because people always love winning in sports. Unfortunately, as Jets and Jags fans, we see that our team loses and, it dampens us. But when we really break it down to the human level of sports, the great players, the not so good players, or what we consider not so good, even though they're professionals, they're still regular human beings. They put their pants on the same way, one leg at a time like we do. And I think what gets lost in the wash is that so many of us are so focused on them being $1 million commodities or gods and goddesses on these high pedestals. But the truth is that they experience sadness and negative feelings and mental health struggles equally as much as us. And millions of dollars or endorsement deals or all these amazing benefits that we look at and with glamour from the outside don't really change that. So within your day-to-day work at TSN, what are some of the things that you've done to take care of your mental health, knowing that sports can really cause a big burnout, especially from being absorbed in an environment all the time? And to add a little bit, I had an interview with Sammy Jo Small, who has released her book just recently about the role that she played. And we talked about this, the mental health of the aspect of sports relates to being immersed in hockey, and how do you take yourself out of it? So what are some of those things that you do to keep your mental health in check, knowing that your job, it requires you to be so involved in sports?
I didn't really learn the importance of the mental health aspect of it really and truly until about the after the Raptors had finished their 2016 playoff run to the Eastern Conference Finals. At that time, I had basically I'd come back from a trip in April, and from the time that I touched down to the end of the playoff run, and a little bit after that, I mean, I worked every single day, and that was travel to Indianapolis, that was travel to Miami, and that was travel to Cleveland, and no days off, and it was bang, bang, bang. It was constant, and the need for content was always building. That never reached a peak because the Raptors were going a distance in the playoffs at that point, at least, that they had never gone before. I have a history of mental health issues in my family, which I don't think is exclusive to me. Many families do, if not every family, if you don't acknowledge it the proper way. I came off of that run and experienced what could only be described as an incredibly devastating breakup. And still having to go back to work, having to do, CFL broadcasts immediately right after, being exhausted, having lost a tremendous amount of weight not because you're not feeling your body, but the getting on a plane and then flying and then being live on air and then flying back and then being on another plane and then being live on air. It takes a toll on you mentally and physically that you're not, or that you don't appreciate. So it's a long process for me, especially over the last, I'd say 3 years. I have found the important things for me is to kind of always be self-aware of where I am, always take my own temperature with respect to mentally where I am, or how I focus in, not just on my work, but on myself personally. Exercise is incredibly important to me. Eating right is incredibly important to me. And having hobbies is incredibly important to me. I'm an avid reader. I've been learning French over the last 2 years. These are things that, exclusive to me, have certainly always allowed me to separate my work and my personal life. And I think that's important. Young aspiring broadcasters like yourself, male, female, whether they want to be producers or they want to be on air, irrespective of color of skin, this can become an obsessive process because it is highly competitive, because it demands so much of your time and even more of your energy. And I would say to you and anyone else that constantly taking your own temperature, constantly staying in front of yourself, because it's very easy to get caught up in where you're traveling to. It's very easy to get caught up in, as I spoke about before, the spectacle of the moment. And if you're not staying right in front of it, you can get lost and get buried very quickly. And I have lived that a few times at TSN, and it's not just exclusive to me. And there is never a positive outcome. There is never a moment where, your head's spinning in every direction and you find a sense of stability and balance. That just doesn't happen. So when it comes to mental health, I always want people to be honest with themselves. I always want people to take a breath. I mean, mindfulness is something that is kind of a ubiquitous term in terms of people being aware of themselves and their emotions. But I think it's a very easy and almost cliched term, but it's a very thin, very, very difficult word to act out as a process. It's incredibly difficult, and mental health is incredibly difficult. So as much as the aspirations and the desire to advance your career is always certainly an important thing for anyone who has dreams, whether it's in this business or any other business, do not try to succeed or aspire to succeed despite your mental health. Or to spite your mental health. I mean, that is a recipe for absolute disaster. I've seen it. I've lived it. So it is very important that you always stay in front of yourself, always check in with yourself, and always be willing to put the phone down, close your laptop, and take a breath. That's not to say that I myself, don't demand hard work out of myself. Don't demand hard work out of the people that I work with. That's not saying that at all. But I think it's important that everyone realizes their own threshold. When I was younger, I used to say this thing to especially Ryerson students. I used to call it threshold for pain. After as the years have gone on, I really thought that is a not a terrible term, but it is a very inconsiderate term. It's very insensitive because the way I see that as being like, well, what can you handle? I think we've now advanced, especially in this last year, we've advanced to a point where if you have to get to a point to ask yourself how much can you handle, you've already gone past the threshold already. You're already in the danger zone. So Bell Let's Talk is an incredibly important initiative. I'm currently working on a mental health feature with an athlete in a league, a prominent athlete in a league, alongside the very talented feature producer Matt Dorman. We've been working on it now for the past 7-8 months, and I feel it's going to be a very important piece that really drives home the point of conversation, of self-evaluation, and a purposefulness to always keep your mental health, always, regardless of where you are and what stage of your life, always at the front of your mind.
And the point you make about taking your temperature it cannot be understated. It is super, super, super important when people are talking about, well, how much, pain can I tolerate? You're 100% right. That means that you've already gone too far. And especially when it comes to working in the sports industry or for others that have dreams or aspirations in another industry, the amount of time that it takes to get to the places that people want to go is so much more than I think people initially realize. And sometimes what happens is people, when things become so oversaturated in competition, that people will try to find shortcuts. So they will try to pack years and years of work into 1 year. And maybe not necessarily in the healthy way that people have seen in the graphics that talk about Elon Musk's advice to try to make progress for something you anticipate to take 10 years in 6 months. And even though you'll fail, you'll still get farther than you would have if you plan to take 10 years. That is true in the sense of trying to advance progress and learn, but not true in the sense of expect yourself to get in 6 months where you should be in 10 years, because that takes so much time. And even though you're still at a very young age yourself, to think back to all the work that you've put in over so many years and the amount of time that you have in terms of leverage over others who are competing, it takes time. And people, I've seen the high school I went to here in Winnipeg is a private high school, and it's very, very competitive, and an all boys school that is essentially preparing students for university. And so what happens is there's a lot of guys that will try to get into the biggest universities in Canada, some in the United States, some will try to get into McGill or University of Toronto. And people then, once they get there, still not good enough, because now I have to get to med school, or now I have to get to law school, and they're not out of the woods. And then what ends up happening is people, they put such a great fixture on the destination that they forget that the journey is the more important aspect. And that leads me to the story of someone that should be near and dear in the hearts of all Raptors fans, DeMar DeRozan. Growing up as a Raptors fan, and when he got drafted, I was excited, and he did so well, and the team got so far, but just could never finish the deal. And then what happened was he got traded for Kawhi, and everyone was like, oh my goodness, like, how could you, how dare you, blah, blah, blah. And then the Raptors ended up winning the finals. And what did we do? We all forgot about, oh, well, DeMar DeRozan, he was great, but Kawhi's a real hero. And then DeMar DeRozan did something that was more important than anything he's ever done on the basketball court, was open up about his struggles with mental health. And one of the things that DeMar DeRozan taught me was that the journey is really more important than the destination, because this is what may happen in people's careers and their experiences, whether it be in sports, playing sports, or working in sports or business, is that they'll be so focused on, I need to get to TSN or SportsCentre. I need to get to this team or this level. And I don't care what it takes. And I don't care if I have to eat shit the entire way. And then they don't get there. And then their mental health collapses, or the opposite happens. They get there and realize, oh, this is it. This is all I wanted. I killed myself, went so crazy just to get here. And now I still have all these problems and it's not that glamorous. And then that's when you're just lost. And there was a very important thing that one of my previous guests, former offensive lineman of the BC Lions, Angus Reid, had said. And true words could not have been spoken. He said, it doesn't matter what you do. It matters how you do it. And that's what his big message was to guys who are finishing football and realizing, hey, you're not going to be a CFL athlete forever, and you're not going to become a multi-generational, millionaire becoming a CFL athlete either. So when guys put too much stock into the specific position that they played as a football player, it would tank them when it was taken from them. And that applies to anybody, men, women of all industries and all businesses and all aspects of life. If you put more stock into the thing that defines you, then when it's taken from you, then you're going to feel lost. Whereas if you care more about that process of how you do things, that will always be able to translate to whatever it is you do. So how do you focus on the journey rather than the destination, considering you are TSN, you have been on SportsCentre, you have been on television, you have covered March Madness, you have covered the Raptors, but that the curtains don't close on life. So how do you then continue to focus on the journey, even though you've already achieved so much success?
Embrace failure. You have to. I mean, 6 months into the start of my role, I've been at TSN now. I was hired December 17th, 2012. I started January 1st, 2013. So, and by the end of the week, I will have been at TSN for 8 years. I blew a live hit on SportsCentre 9 months into my time at TSN. And it was devastating. It was absolutely, 11 months. So, but anyways, it was absolutely devastating. It was when you blow, and I've recounted the story dozens of times. When you blow a hit on live TV on the program that is consistently the most watched program on the biggest specialty network in Canada, it's like, I live on the 28th floor in a condo in Toronto. It's as if I just jumped off the balcony. And it is, in that moment where all the trimmings and trappings of being on TV, they all get peeled away. And really what you are is just a dude holding a mic in front of a camera. And it took a long time for me to rebound from that. And even now, I mean, the mind plays tricks on you. You always think about what happens if I blow a live hit again, when I know I'm not gonna. I've been on live TV. I've had the absolute privilege, and to use your word again, I've been blessed to be on the sidelines for multiple Grey Cups. I've earned and worked hard for the things that I have, but I've always embraced the perspective of failure. And I have failed numerous times. And the one thing that I think isn't just exclusive to the journeys of people who want to get into media, it's not exclusive to athletes. It really is all encompassing of the human race. Especially now, that people have a hard time dealing with failure because they feel like if they're not, as you pointed out, if they're not constantly succeeding and succeeding and succeeding and succeeding, well, then what's the point? Then either it's not worth it, or the things that I'm doing, I'm not good enough. So then that leads you down another darker path. Again, that idea I talked about, threshold for pain. Sometimes people will push themselves to the nth degree. And not realize that when you make a mistake, when you fail, when you flub a line, when you ask a terrible question. I mean, when I started at TSN, I was covering the Leafs around this time of year. I would cover it for a good 6-7 weeks when Mark Masters would be covering the World Juniors. And when I started covering the Leafs, I had a terrible relationship with Dion Phaneuf. He hated my questions, didn't really like my demeanor, and pulled me outside of the Leafs dressing room in Buffalo and hectored me and excoriated me and tried to educate me on how he wanted questions to be asked. And when you're young in the business and you're trying to build respect within the locker room, and the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs does that to you, you sit back and you're like, oh, fudge. But all of those experiences have now educated me and enlightened me to embrace aspects of my personality that I didn't know how to reveal, not just to the world, but to myself. Over the last 4 years, I have built and embraced, who I truly am on television and in life. Chris Cuthbert told me once when I started TSN, you will not know who you are on camera for 10 to 15 years. You won't know how you operate in front of a microphone for that long. Even now, when I'm voicing things on SportsCentre, I'm constantly scrutinizing myself as if it's my first day at TSN. But I always embrace the perspective of, if I make a mistake, I'm going to learn from it. I'm not perfect. I'm absolutely not perfect. And to your point about DeMar DeRozan, I had the absolute pleasure of working on a feature with DeMar. It'll be 4 years ago. 4 years ago? Yeah. No. 3 years ago. It'll be about 3 years ago. This coming March, and it was about his love for Toronto, and he dropped subtle hints about his mental health, about growing up in Compton, but growing up in a very dire, dreary, dim, and desolate situation. He welcomed me and some of our crew into his home, and to see the beginnings of him being willing to show his vulnerability is certainly inspiring. And I think it's vital. I know Kevin Love tried to continue the conversation. But I also want people to always balance mental health and the true cost of mental health with understanding and accepting and dealing with a bad day. Because one bad day and one mistake does not have to destroy your mental health. It does not have to crush you. It does not have to become a symptom of a bigger problem. And that's why I always tell aspiring broadcasters, every mistake matters as much as every accomplishment, because you get this kind of sense of ego, arrogance, whatever you want to call it, when you do something great. When you feel great, you want to dust your shoulders off. You feel fabulous about it. But when you make a mistake, you feel, especially a bad mistake, you try to run away from it. You don't want to, because that feeling doesn't feel very good. It doesn't feel very good to understand that you just did something that let somebody down, let a lot of people down, or missed the mark on what you intended on doing. But it's as equally as important as raising your fists or pumping your fists or patting yourself on the back, because every piece of content, every relationship, every interaction you have is based upon a previous experience. It's how you comport yourself is based upon the things that you've learned, how you've grown, how you've evolved. And you cannot evolve as a person or a broadcaster or an athlete or anybody if you're not willing to digest your mistakes. And I'm always the first one to put my hand up when I've made a mistake, not because I'm intentionally trying to punish myself, but I'm always willing to say, I made this mistake, and now that I've made this mistake, I will commit to never making it again. I can't guarantee it. You can't guarantee anything in life, but I'm going to commit to not making that mistake again. And I think when you're talking about process, if you're not willing to embrace your mistakes, then you're really not willing to embrace the entire process.
And there's a quote that I read a few months ago that said, "You have survived 100% of your worst days." And that was something that was kind of relieving to read, because people always think that, the next thing that happens that's going to be bad is going to be the worst thing in the world. And how am I ever going to get through it? And all those cliche quotes about, this will pass, are just BS. And it doesn't matter because this mistake and this bad thing and this negative thing. But if you use that perspective, you come to understand in the famous quote from the Roman philosopher Seneca that oftentimes our fears are worse than our dangers. So therefore we suffer more in our imagination than in our actual reality. So people are so worried about what's going to happen that you're almost experiencing it twice, because you're thinking about it and then you go through it. So you've done double the work that you need to do. But obviously at the same time, people think in the future or think about the future because the past is helping them fuel anticipation for, okay, what am I going to do in terms of visualizing how I'm going to succeed? What if this comes up? What if the teleprompter goes off? What if there's some malfunction? Because obviously mistakes are going to happen. Things are going to screw up. You're going to have to embrace mistakes and failure. And it's a great point that you brought that up without even a second thought, because people in the age of social media, the internet, have really idealized perfection, so much so to the point where they think that making a mistake is the worst thing in the world, or that you have to hide it. You can never, ever, ever show imperfections on the internet, or you can never broadcast anyone, hey, I've made a mistake, or this happened that was bad, or that I'm not proud of, because every single person has made a mistake or done something that they're not proud of. But the more that you try to hide it or bottle it away, then the more that it's just going to slowly build subconsciously. And especially when you mentioned, blowing a hit on live TV, in that moment, people watching at home aren't like, oh, like screw this guy and he sucks and blah, blah, blah. They may just, oh, whatever. They laugh or they don't even notice it. But internally, when you are so conscious of all the work that you're doing minute by minute, that seems like in the moment, the worst thing in the world. But figuring out how to embrace that is definitely one of the toughest roads that people will take when you're in such a highly competitive industry. But the fact that you can admit to mistakes and embrace that you will fail and be great is an important part of being able to have strong mental health and being able to take care of your mental health. And I think one of the great things that sports teaches us is being even keeled, that it's good to celebrate small wins. And football has taught me so many of these lessons from having played and watched. You look at the demeanor of someone like head coach of the Blue Bombers, Mike O'Shea. They lost 2 gut-wrenching games in just the worst ways to the Argos and the Alouettes this last season. And you didn't see him throwing his headset or freaking out. And he said, oh, it makes me sick and this sucks and this is not good. But we're going to rebound. And when they won big games, they were still even tempered. And so when they ended up winning the Grey Cup, it was such a great feeling of joy for all Bomber fans, including myself and people who were happy to see the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and the city of Winnipeg and the province of Manitoba finally get over the hump after 29 years of not winning. But in those moments as a fan, I remember watching the end of the Alouettes game when the Bombers blew the lead and saying to myself, when's this team going to get a bleeping break? Because I was like, I can't believe this. I can't believe this. And even the Argos game, my friends and I were at Boston Pizza watching. We're like, oh, yay, it's all good. And then they lost. And I was like, oh, my, no, come on. They can't lose this game to this team. But then at the end
I was there. I remember it.
And then at the end of the day, they won it all. And it made us zoom out and look at everything and then realize I'm actually glad that they lost those games, because it really forced them to look at themselves in the mirror and see what they were made of. And in all the things that we people will read about mindfulness, there was an old, there was a proverb or an old story I read in the book by Jay Shetty, Think Like a Monk, where it talked about, this is like, it was an analogy for zooming out and really not getting super festered with mistakes or with greatness. And it talked about this man who owned a horse. And the horse ran away and he was like, oh, like, that's so terrible. I can't believe it. I lost my horse. And then the farmer said, good thing, bad thing? Oh, who knows? And what happens was the horse came back the next day and he was so happy and said, yes, I can't believe it. My horse finally came back. This is so amazing. And the farmer that lived next to him said, good thing, bad thing? Who knows? And then what happened was his little brother was riding the horse and got flung off and broke his leg. And he was like, oh, that's so poor and terrible. My brother broke his leg. The farmer responds again, good thing, bad thing, who knows? And then finally what happens is there was a war in the country and the brother is not drafted to the army because he's not physically able to enlist in their military. And then he says, oh, what a lucky break. I can't believe he survived. And then the farmer again says, good thing, bad thing, who knows? So the lesson that taught me was that though there may be mistakes and though there may be high moments, it's important to celebrate the little successes, but it's also important to embrace those failures, because you made a flub on live television, but then you went and covered live at Young Dundas Square the Toronto Raptors winning the NBA championship in truly one of the most amazing moments in live sports history in Canada. So then when you zoom out and see the bigger picture, you realize that the failures are necessary for that pinnacle at the top of the mountain. Or I guess like when the Jets won the Super Bowl, but
which will never happen.
but how that wraps, so how that touches on our point is, when you zoom out on the career that you've had or the things that you've achieved and maybe not been so proud of in your personal life, how do you continue to see the ways to zoom out, even when you're living in the moment of something that is very enjoyable and also maybe things that aren't as enjoyable?
The one benefit I have, and I'm very blessed to have it, is I have a group of people around me, and I think it's important for everyone to have a group of people around them. It doesn't have to be many. It doesn't have to be 2 or 3 or 10 or 12. It's whatever works for you. And having a group of people around me who offer me support and who offer me advice and who offer me honesty. And honesty is incredibly important to me. Especially when it comes to my personal relationships. I'm much rather someone who, if I'm interacting with somebody, or whether it's someone I'm romantically involved with or a best friend, I always want it straight up front. Tell me like it is. I don't want people to be fluffy. I don't want people to dumb it down. I don't want people to try to go ahead and manipulate what they have to say or what they have to do to protect my feelings, because I'd rather deal with something that's in front of me, deal with it, maybe not be able to solve it, but face it, deal with it, and find a way to move on from it. And that's not always easy. And it's not an easy process to kind of get up the next day and be like, oh yeah, no, I'm right as rain. And, I've moved on from that. It's difficult. I mean, there are certain aspects, certain things I've dealt with that even now will rear their head every once in a while that make me shake my head. But it's so important to have those people around you, not to pat you on the back, not to always kick you in the ass, but to always keep you looking forward. Keep your mind present in the here and now. The quote that you have from Seneca is incredibly appropriate, because to that point, the greatest damage you can do is twofold. When you get caught up in your own thoughts, and then you're so caught up in your own thoughts that you don't appreciate the things that are going on in front of you. And then it compounds and you're making double mistakes, in your mind and in reality. And I find, especially when speaking to those, whether they're aspiring to get into broadcast or they're not, or any aspect of life, is always telling them, as much as they have a dream, as much as they have a goal, that is not their destination. I didn't want to be on TV. I had no desires to be on TV. I worked for the National Post. Gary Smith, who was a feature writer for Sports Illustrated, was my hero. Loved his work, loved his writing. I was very fortunate to work alongside Bruce Arthur and Sean Fitzgerald and Eric Corrine and Aaron Valois, Guy Spurrier and Jim Bray, and what I still think was the best sports newsroom in the country, and through previous iterations of other great Canadian writers, was the best sports newsroom in the country. And then one day I wasn't there anymore. They just didn't renew my contract. And, having to sit down at 26, and be like, well, the thing that I had always dreamed of doing, the road that I was on, has now been closed off to me. But there's a detour that's ahead. And I went through a lot of emotions, went through a lot of anger and angst, and, through certainly working hard to tell a story in a way that I felt I could through my writing, was able to get an opportunity at TSN, because TSN at the time, and still does, kind of values storytelling in different ways, irrespective of your knowledge as a sports fan. And I remember, my first few months at TSN, my screen tests at TSN, not knowing that it didn't feel right, didn't feel like me, didn't feel like the thing I wanted to do. And then realizing that that wasn't necessarily reflective of the actual job. It was me not opening my mind to a whole new opportunity, me not opening my mind to a whole different perspective, me being so focused on, I had a plan and I had a process and I had a destination that I was going to go to, and by hook or by crook. And then when life had a second idea, had a different plan for me, and not necessarily life, but other people's decisions impacted me in a different way. I had to look at myself and say, okay, if I'm going to recalibrate, then I have to open myself up to different possibilities. Because if everybody got everything they wanted all the time, life would be boring as hell. Because it would just it would be repetitive and monotonous and boring and wouldn't feel fulfilling. And not to put too fine a point on it and be repetitive, but failing in achieving a goal that I'd set out for myself, allowed me to really kind of embrace the moments and the opportunities that TSN was giving me, work hard at them. And now I found myself back in a place where I am writing again. And I'm writing, essays and features for SportsCentre. And I'm back doing something I loved very dearly. And to go to know that it took kind of a circuitous path, and we're not back where I'm started, but I'm kind of looped around and I'm kind of back on the road, but on an adjacent road that's kind of along the path that I was when I was at the National Post. It just shows you that if you open your mind to every possibility, if you stay present, look ahead, and don't get bogged down by things that have already happened, that already in the past tense and you have no control over, then you're opening yourself up to all the possibilities that may eventually bring you back to the place you're always meant to be. And that's just not in sports, that's in life in general. And I impress upon anyone, like I said about taking your temperature, always be aware of where you are, always look down and make sure that gravity has put your feet where they are, and that you're not trying to drag yourself backwards, because there is nothing good that's ever been gained by anyone when they're on their path for the day to turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to try to walk backwards, because it's an impossibility. You can't close the door once it's been open. You can't try to change things that have already happened. So it's very important. I've always thought, for me, to realize the things that have happened, not that everything happens for a reason, but they've happened. And now it's incumbent upon me to take those experiences and inform myself for what's ahead, because there's a whole other slew of decisions that I'm not even thinking about right now that will probably impact my life as much as the other situations have previously. So it's incredibly important to always keep yourself understanding that everything has happened. You've gained the experiences, you've gained the knowledge, you've gained the purpose, and to keep just being active and moving forward.
And there's two major quotes and pieces from children's cartoons that are immediately come to mind for me when you mentioned the point about life would be incredibly boring if everyone got everything they ever wanted. And what it immediately makes me think of is in an old episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, when Squidward has finally had enough with living next to SpongeBob and Patrick and moves to the glamorous area of Tentacle Acres. And people, with how iconic the show is, have seen the loop of him waking up and saying, another great day. And then going to the supermarket, going to the dance class, going to play his clarinet, riding his bicycle, and those same 4 activities every day, over and over. And then the music starts to tune out, and you see his smile start to droop into a frown. And at the end, he's like, I think I'm not going to play my clarinet today. And then realizes at the end that the most fun that he was meant to have was going against what he thought was not fun in the first place, was playing with the reef blower and being really silly. So it shows that you're right. If everyone had everything they ever wanted in life, that doesn't give you satisfaction. Having purpose, finding meaning, that gives you more satisfaction and at least helps you tread forward, even in situations that are not ideal for yourself. And then the other thing that pops into my mind from another children's cartoon is when you mentioned that you loved writing and you were at the National Post, and all of a sudden, boom, the door closes and now you're at TSN and you're on air and all these things. But here you are again, writing. And it makes me think back to the 2008 animated film by DreamWorks, Kung Fu Panda, when the very wise Master Oogway looks at Shifu and says, one often meets his destiny on the road he takes to avoid it. And so even though you thought that writing was out of the picture, here you are again writing. And maybe it wasn't in the specific way that you thought it was meant to be, but how you were going to carry out your work was the thing that was going to happen no matter where you were through hell or high water. And so those are two important things that I think people often forget about, is that life isn't always about getting everything you want all the time. And also that if you were really meant to have something that you were aspiring for, it will come in a way, but maybe not the initial way that you had thought. And it doesn't always come in a way that is obvious or is point blank, but it will arrive in some form or another if you keep your head down and keep focused on enduring the process and really getting to know it and fall in love with it and really enjoy it. Because most of the time people look back and see Jay and Dan on SportsCentre, or they see yourself, or they see Sarah Lesky, or they see other people, and they say, wow, like, look at them, they're having fun and they're doing all these great things on television, but you guys aren't recording for 24, for 8 hours a day and you're doing or making all these jokes. Like, there's a lot of mundane things that eventually become boring that from the outside, before you get there, look, oh man, that must be so great. And they're having fun. And it's like working at Apple and you're napping on the job, or Google, but there are boring and mundane things that happen with every single job that you're always going to take up. So embrace them, embrace failure, embrace the things that are monotonous, but at least know that what you're doing is not going to take precedence over how you're doing the thing that you're doing. So many great points, and it really encompasses this topic of mental health so well, because even despite being such a young person and having had so much success in the industry, there's still moments where you'll fail. There's still moments where you'll make mistakes, but how you learn to cope and to maneuver through the mistakes and through the yucky stuff is what helps you to continually find success, rather than just, oh, well, I got to see it, TSN, and, the credits roll and the curtains close and that's it. And now I'm on autopilot till I'm dead. That's not the case. So what I wanted to then ask you is, what are some of the things that you now look forward to going ahead in the future with possibilities for the work that you're doing? Or what are some of the things that you want to do in life outside of work that you really find will bring you satisfaction or joy or purpose that aren't necessarily tied to your day-to-day job?
Well, I mean, going back to my love of languages and reading, it's something that, I have a stack of books beside me. It's something that I always look forward to on a day-to-day basis. Personally, I think there are a lot of things I still wish to accomplish in my personal life about, having a family and being with, a partner that I could share life with. And I think that's true, not of everybody, and it's not meant for everybody, but it's something that is important to me. And I also think I'm always one to sit down and look, because I don't like having regrets. And I always assess, okay, is there something that I can try, whether it's learning a musical instrument or going back. I did judo when I was younger as a kid, going back and trying to achieve my black belt a few years ago. I was a lifeguard for about 10 years and I hadn't swam for a long time. And one day I just said to myself, you know what, it's time to get back in the pool. And I swam, quite aggressively, rigorously after that for about 2-3 years. And then I got to the pool one day and I'm like, you know what, that served its purpose at the time. And now it's time for me to move on to something else. So I tend not to, I like to fixate on something when it's in my mind's eye and I want to experience it again. So I always keep my mind open to that. There could be something, it happened to me when I was 20, in my early 20s, and I was working a shift at the North York YMCA one day, and I said to myself, you know what, I am going to apply for my master's in journalism at Ryerson. I've always wanted to go to Ryerson, and this is something that I want to do. And I find that when my own sense of purpose propels me forward, that is the most fulfilling path to walk on for me. And it's not these like kind of road to Damascus epiphanies that I have, but it's more me saying to myself, now's the time. It's time now. It's time for you to go ahead and to put all your chips in. And that's one thing I'll say about myself. I am a all-in chips kind of guy. When I want something or something's important to me, I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to give it my best. And it's not just one singular thing. I could have a couple things on the go, but if it's on my plate, I'm going to give it the best I got. And I think I've learned now, although there are things that I want to achieve, I don't necessarily have an itemized list of things that today I want to do that, and tomorrow I want to do that, and tomorrow I want to do that. It's more like, okay, I have a routine of things that I like doing. And it's all, after I get off this interview with you, I have a feature to write, and then I want to work on some French, and then I want to read my book, and I have a process to my day, and get up tomorrow and I'll exercise and I'll do the things that help me get through not help me, but kind of propel me through my day. And so what's important to me every day is to make sure that I've got that process in front of me, but always open to something that might change it. Always part of my job is, at least when we weren't living in a pandemic, was I get a call. I remember it was almost this time last year where I was on the road, and all of a sudden I got a phone call. I knew Kobe Bryant had just passed, and I knew that I had to get ready because I was flying out to LA. Now that's obviously part of a work question, but that's part of that's any aspect of my life. I'm always someone who, if a buddy calls me up or a friend calls me up or someone calls me up and says, I'm doing this, would you be up for it? Absolutely. Or I'm going to go try this new food. Would you be up for it? Absolutely. Experiences and the value of individual experiences, the value of, and what you can extract from every experience is very important to me, because it's just something as a writer. And I'm sure you can appreciate this because you are quite well read, is that the value of a perspective is built on foundations of a multitude of perspectives that came before. And I find it very, very encouraging now that I'm in my mid-30s, to know that I've come to this point where I've opened my mind up to everything, and I'm like, okay, cool, I'm down to do anything. I won't necessarily say that I ascribe to the say yes principle to everything, because I think that everyone kind of has to know their own limitations sometimes. But when it comes to my personal life, there are things that I want to experience, and when it's their time, I will give it every ounce of my effort. And then when something else comes up and it's time for me to move on, I'll be ready to move on and experience something new.
And experiences are truly part of what human beings love living for. That's why people love traveling. That's why people love going to sports games. You're not getting something physical out of it. You get a unique experience that you can look back on that sometimes may never be replicated, and most of the times isn't. So we're getting towards the end of our time here, and this, what you were saying last, perfectly wraps up into the final question I was going to ask you. So with having covered the Raptors 2019 championship, you got to be at Young Dundas Square. You got to get the shout out from Jay and Dan as you were there in the streets with who knows what was going to happen. But the great moment really for all Raptors fans was the parade. And that really was the culmination of so many years of Carter's missed shot, to Kawhi exercising the ghosts of the past, to so many things that we Raptors fans have witnessed. So my final question to you is, what was the coolest thing about being at the 2019 championship parade for the Toronto Raptors? What was the coolest moment that you were like, wow, this is it. This is really it.
Although I was at the parade and I live quite close to the parade route, I have to go back to the night that they won right after Game 6. And the reason I do that is because everyone, when you see people congregate together for sporting events, and for those of who are not too old, they think of the 2011 Stanley Cup Final in Game 7 after the Canucks lost, and basically, torched the city is probably too extreme of an expression, but it's not too far away either. And that sense of hesitation and the fact that I had a security guard with me the whole time. And I remember saying to myself, I won't need it. I won't need it. I knew not. I mean, the gentleman who was with us, he was a great guy and he was fun, and and put a hand out when it got a little too rowdy. But I never needed it, because the beautiful thing about that night was it perfectly encapsulated all the beautiful things about our country. For all the frustrations and the regional divides and just the sheer size of our nation, and how sometimes what we think and what we deem to be the true essence of being Canadian can be lost depending, or can mean different things depending on where you live in the country. That night, looking at the people around me, knowing that they were of every shape, size, color, creed, sexual orientation, that they came from a multitude of places, and that they'd all come together in this moment to celebrate not just the winning of, not just a sports franchise winning, which on its face is kind of a one-dimensional achievement. Like, it's basically it really is kind of a corporate success, right? Because someone invested money into this corporate entity, and it did well for it, and it succeeded for its quarterly earnings, or its fiscal year. It was great. When you add that human element to it, the fact that people, and I'm reading Doug Smith's book right now on 25 years of the Toronto Raptors, the We the North book, and I know Doug quite well. I worked alongside him, have had the pleasure of working alongside him. He articulates it quite appropriately in expressing that Raptors fans show the possibilities of what a community, a collective celebration looks like in Canada, what it looks like in its truest form. And that's what I saw that night. No one got out of hand. No one was rowdy. The police were as much a part of the celebration. Now, surely the parade a few days later went on too long, on too hot of a day. And yes, there was a few individuals who, caused absolute moments of terror at the very end of it. But that night, in this kind of improvised, sudden explosion of emotion, it was perfect. It was this perfect moment, and I can close my eyes now, and I'm back there. And I don't know if I will ever experience that again, covering anything that has to do with a triumphant Canadian team, because it's the first time it happened. I imagine it was, and it would have been different in 1992 when Joe Carter got that final out against the Atlanta Braves, and there were celebrations here, and it would have been different, 12 months later when Carter hit the home run and won the Blue Jays a back-to-back championship. It was different because we've evolved to a certain point in this country where Canada is this undefinable and yet so charming plurality of experiences of different people coming together and loving this country in their own way. And it was on its full force that night. The volume was, someone had turned the volume all the way up and ripped the knob off. It was just an effervescent explosion of emotion for 4.5 hours. And I remember getting back into this condo at 4:30 in the morning, and still I didn't know how I was going to go to sleep, because that energy had penetrated into my soul, because it was so happy, so much elation. And even if, sure, it goes against the tenets of sports journalism that you don't cheer in the press box, I wasn't cheering for the Raptors that night, although clearly on my hat I am a Raptors fan. But that night I wasn't cheering for the Raptors. I was cheering for my country, because it touched me to see all these people and random people celebrating together, high fives, hugging, no shoving, no pushing, no expletives. It was just yes. And not yes in the sense of, we matter United States, or we matter NBA. Like, no, it's like we did it. And Raptors fans, especially because of how bad the team had been for so long, and to see that their own emotional investment, not just this economic investment that I referred to previously, but their emotional investment finally pay off. And in the way it did, I mean, that night for me will be perfect forever. I mean, and nothing. And what I'm happy about it is I remember getting home that day and that night, and they put the reports out that, you know, the Toronto police had arrested nobody. And there were that night hundreds of thousands of people in Dundas Square and up in Yonge and Bloor. And for that mass of people to come together in such an explosion of emotion, and for everyone to kind of pull in the same direction and embrace each other the way they did, and not have it end acrimoniously or with someone in the back of a cruiser, was, I think, the ultimate expression of how good we can have it in this country when we all just embrace each other.
I don't know if I could have put the words together any better than you just did. And as being a longtime Raptors fan, and having seen the 22-60, and having seen all the missed game winners and all the playoff, you know, treachery and all the bad things, it transcended sports when they did win. And you are 100% right. It wasn't just the economic investment and put the money in the machine and get the result and yay, that's it. It was more than just, and you're right, it was more than just proving it to the United States or proving it to the NBA. Because I remember, as many Winnipeggers will do, is go down to Minnesota to watch the Raptors play. And I remember I went there one of the 3 times that they had ever lost in Minnesota in franchise history up to that point in the 2011-2012 season. They lost by 15 to the 17-6 to the eventual 17-65 Timberwolves. And I remember that there was this kid sitting behind us, and like he was making fun of the Raptors, and he was like, the Raptors should play in the kid NBA. And I remember like my brothers and I were just like, so like, what do you mean? Like we were like, you know, like, oh my, the kid NBA, like, you know, the Timberwolves are worse than the Raptors. And then for them to have won, it wasn't just, like now we're a legit team. It was, we finally did it. It was legit. It was real. No stunts, no tricks, no controversy, nothing. And it was such a great culmination of the country uniting together and really embracing the we the North, and embracing the different, you know, array of demographics that exist within this country. And for them to have done it all against what people would argue the greatest team to have ever been assembled in NBA history is something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. And I'll always remember what it was. And you'll always remember where you were. And I don't know how you slept that night. You know, I wish I could have been in Toronto, staying up. You know, so they have the movie Sleepless in Seattle. Like Sleepless in Toronto would have been all Raptors fans that night. But the way that you put it is unequivocally, you know, is absolute poetry. And I'm so glad that you were able to share what that experience truly was like, because it is more than just basketball, and it was a part of our community, our country, and the fabric of what it really means to be Canadian. So that wraps up our time today, Matthew. I'm so happy. It was absolutely outstanding. All the points you brought up and using your intelligent vocabulary and the experiences you have. I'm so grateful that you were able to be a guest on today's episode. It was amazing.
I appreciate it. It was an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you everyone today for listening to today's episode with SportsCentre reporter Matthew Scianitti.